Hey guys, welcome back to API testing in Postman. So from this lecture to next few lecture, we're going to cover everything about GraphQL API. So in this lecture, we're going to cover what is GraphQL API, what is GraphQL Query, and so on. So let's start. So what is GraphQL? So GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for executing those queries with your existing data. It allows clients to request the only data they need, making APIs faster and more efficient. So what does it mean? In a very simple sentence, GraphQL is a query language like SQL query, but it is not a database query. Okay, this is a specific query that's used to build, an API which is called GraphQL, and it's one of the benefits for this GraphQL. It's help the client, the user, to request or allow it's to request specific data they need, from the API as a response. Not anything more, not anything less. So whatever they need as a response, they can do through this query, through this, GraphQL API. That's one of the advantages of the GraphQL. Then what is GraphQL Query? So query is the way to request the data from the GraphQL API. So we know this GraphQL, it's an API and it is used the query. So here is the query. Again, it's query. We know the database, we run query to fetch the data from the database. Similarly, over here, GraphQL, it has a query, and that query is used to request the data from the GraphQL API. It specifies exactly which field or data a client wants, nothing more or less, as I said. While the typical REST APIs is request loading multiple URLs, GraphQL API gets all the data your app needs in a single request. This is one of the big difference between the GraphQL API and REST API. The REST API, to get your expected response, sometimes or most of the times you need to run multiple, API endpoint. Whereas the GraphQL query, can help you to run a single shot, single request and get the desired all the response. Okay, so to get your response ultimately in a GraphQL API, you have to use the query. So query is the way to send your request. So this is the query. Here is an example. Here is they use a simple JSON based, the query, which is based on JavaScript. So the format is like this. And here is the example, this is the query. Here is a query example. So the query about the user, right? So you can type over here, query. So you can mention this is a query, and then query about a user ID. And we know this like REST API. If you have done the REST API, you know this REST API can help you to also retrieve the data about the user employees, right? Similarly here, you can run a query that can return or response user, and you can make it a very specific user ID based on user ID, the ID number 1. And through this, you can make it very specific along with this user ID. For the user ID, what type of data, sub data you want to retrieve, you want to see, like ID, name, email address, right? In unlike REST API, so if you just search user ID, it will show ID and specific make a ID number 1. So it will show you all the data, whatever the data, it's already up there in the database, right? So it's the default data. But here, this user ID, this user may have more data like ID, name, email, address, phone number, and so on. But you can make it very specific over here what exactly data you want. So as a response, it will show you exactly the what data you are looking for, nothing less, nothing more. So that's what it's saying. This fetches the user ID 1 and only return the ID, name, and email. Okay, so this is an example of the GraphQL query. Okay, so that's all for now. Thank you.